Hello and welcome to the second grade curriculum preview for the fourth 6 weeks. Thank you for joining me, and obviously you are listening to the voiceover presentation. If you'd like to go through these slides just on your own and look at the notes at the bottom of the slide, feel free to stop this video and go back into this more, or if you'd like to watch this and then look at the slides for more detail, you've got that option. So whatever you need, I hope it works best for you. I hope you enjoy having these two different versions. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with a reminder about the importance of using the unit overviews as you plan. The unit overviews really is your portal for everything that you need to start planning for your unit. It's got the pacing guide, it has the clarifiers. So I wanted to make sure that you felt comfortable accessing that in Canvas. So you can pause and take a look at the instructions on the screen, but that'll tell you how to get to the unit overview, which is really your key planning document. Okay, so let's take a look at the calendar for Unit 4. So this 6 weeks starts on January 16th. And then goes through February 23rd. We've got 2 student holidays in there, and then we've got the Science CBA coming up the week after the 6 weeks is over. So just a couple of things to keep in mind. So we're going to talk about the pacing for this unit, and just to remind you that this is a screenshot of the unit overview, and you can just click on the pacing guide that's hyperlinked at the top of each unit overview, and I've got that highlighted in yellow. And when you do, you're going to see this screen, which is the actual pacing guide. So just at a glance, you can see that this unit is divided up into 4 different mini units. These are our leading standards. And then on the right-hand side of the document, you can see those are the partnering process skills. And if you're utilizing AIMS and STEM Scopes lessons, most of the time those process skills are going to be incorporated into those lessons. So you don't really have to do any standalone different teaching with that. But I want you to see what the process skills are. And I'll usually make note of those in my notes section for the resources in the unit overview as well. So let's take a look at the pacing guide in a little bit different view, and let's talk a little bit about some key points for each section. So when we look at the pacing guide, I've divided that up into 4 different areas, and we've got 3 different content standards, and then we've got a process skill that kind of stands in there as well. So when we start off the unit, I've got 5 classes here for conservation of natural resources, and that really is going to set the stage for spiraling through with the rest of the mini units, which are rocks, natural sources of water, and then natural and man-made objects. So taking some time to talk about ways to identify and demonstrate using, conserving, and disposing of natural resources is going to be the way we start off the 6 weeks. Then we move into 7 days talking about rocks. And the specific standards for 2nd grade is that students will observe the rocks and describe the rocks in 3 different ways: size, texture, and color. And when we talk about size, we can do some non-standard measurement as well as standard measurement. Length, we could measure around it. We could also start to measure the mass of that. So the size can be measured in many different ways, and then texture and color. The process skill that I have listed underneath rocks right here is to collect data from observations, and we're going to be using hand lenses, primary balances, and then non-standard measurement, and that's a process skill that's listed for 2nd grade. Then we move into another mini unit, which is 7 classes of natural sources of water. And our standard talks about identifying, comparing properties of fresh water and salt water. So in previous grade levels, students have really looked at identifying, what makes an ocean versus a river versus a pond versus a lake. You in 2nd grade are going to hone in on what are some of the comparisons, properties that we can compare between fresh and salt water specifically, so a little bit more detailed. We'll want to spiral in the conserving of water with that. And then the other process skill we have is comparing results of investigations that your students have and then comparing it with what scientists know about the natural world. So that's another process skill that fits nicely in with this one. The last unit we have are 7 classes of looking at natural versus man-made objects. So students should be able to tell the difference between a natural object and a man-made object, how to conserve them, and then again bringing in that process skill of 2.2F with comparing what the students are doing and what scientists know. So here's a little bit of a different view, looking at the different standards vertically that I wanted to point out. So this is a lot of information, so you can pause the video and take a look at that. But basically what you want to do is look at this by row. Now this information is at the top of each one of the standards clarifiers, but I thought it would be helpful for you to see what have your second graders done when we talk about rocks already, and what are they going to do with the information and to build on for next year. So for instance, with rocks, you can see that they started to generally look at those when they were in kindergarten, and then last year they looked more specifically at soil, and then in second grade we're going to look at more specific characteristics of rocks, and the next year they talk about how soil is formed. So that's a thread that you can see how that moves through. You can look at that for the other 2 standards that I have on here as well, so you can kind of see where they've gone and where they're going. Here is a couple of summary statements that kind of like, okay, so that's great, Brenda, what does this mean? This helps you focus in on the pieces that's really going to be the focal point for second grade. And you can see each one of those key points. So feel free to pause that and then just take a look at what I've got written there. So I wanted to point out one of the resources that I really like for this unit, and it's an Ames rubber band book that you might have seen before, or maybe you use this. It's called Stanley the Sea Star, and I just took some snapshot pictures of the different pages of the book so you can get an idea of what it's like. One of the great things about Ames is that they have age-appropriate resources that are spot on for the standard. And this is an example of a booklet that's written specifically for 2.7b, talking about freshwater versus saltwater. It can be difficult for us to find informational text that talks about freshwater versus saltwater, but here you go. So I wanted to make sure that you knew that you had this. If you're not familiar with these rubber band books, they're listed in the unit overview, and I also have a how-to guide. Use them. So I'm going to pull over the unit overview for just a second to give you a visual of where these are found. So this is the unit overview, and I'm on the second or third page. Here's the standard. And here's all of the resources that we have to teach that standard. And there's that fresh or salty book I just showed you. And then I just wanted to point out that there's a little PowerPoint presentation. Every time we have a rubber band book that's listed, I always have this presentation to help you know how to use it. So you can click on those and access what I'm going to show you next. So we've got the book, so sometimes I get questions, so now what, Brenda? What do we do with this book? So this is what that quick guide looks like. It's a little standalone PowerPoint, and it just takes you through, you know, what are these? What do I do with them? How do I put them together? And then how can I use them in my science class? And so there's just a couple of tips on ways that you can use. These are most powerful if you're using these books over several days in several different ways. So they're really great because they fit into a baggie. You can keep them in their science journal, and the students can pull them back out over several days, and they can write on them, they can color them, they can draw on them, they can highlight key things. So here's just an example of one way that you can use these books. You can assemble the books with your students, or I would have a parent volunteer do it to save you some instruction time, and then just simply start previewing the books by looking at the title, looking at some of the illustrations, not even getting into the text at first. And there's just a couple of examples of ways to use those with doing some partner work and so forth. And then put those away. And then on day 2, we'll have a different focus. Maybe on day 2, we pull the books out again and actually read the text. We could easily incorporate some of our reading strategies that we've been rolling out this year. They would work with these very nicely. And then we would put those away and then pull them out again on day 3. And maybe this time we look at specific vocabulary that's in there. So I have a couple of different ideas for you to do that as well. So again, really powerful if we use them over several days in different ways. Okay, I just want to show you a couple of images here to help you get some ideas maybe for some interactive word walls. So when we look at rocks, it might be neat to have students bring a rock from home or find one on campus, and then they can start to classify them together based on color, size, and texture. And then this is an example of just using baggies to actually show some of the samples that they bring in. A couple of tools I want to make sure you're aware of for this unit. You do have rock samples in the science lab. That is something most science labs have a plethora of different kinds of rocks for students to look at. The smart scopes are fantastic tools to look at the finer details of the rocks. And then I want to remind you that we have these primary balances that students can use to compare maybe the mass of them as well as the non-standard measurement, or you could bring in using actual rulers. Here's a couple of technology ideas that we have with some specific tie-ins for the content for second grade for this 6 weeks. I mentioned the smart scopes already, but Chatterpix is a great, easy tool to use, and the kids really love that. And I've got an example there of a video if you're not familiar with that tool. And just a reminder about the vocabulary, I want to make sure that you have the actual official list of the vocabulary for each standard, and you're going to find that on the standard clarifier. And again, that's linked on the unit overview. I know many teachers like to use the STEM Scopes picture vocabulary, which is great. It has some of the words, but not usually all of them. So in order for students to really master the particular standard, we'll want to be sure that we're using the clarifiers list. And then finally, I just want to remind you that you do have an academic coach for science, and that is me, Brenda Swarzinski, and I am happy to help you either by email, a phone call, or if you'd like me to come out and help you plan or meet with you and your team, I would love to help you in any way. Thank you so much for joining me, and please let me know if there's anything I can do to support your science program at your campus.